Welcome to our webinar on new leadership. If anybody can't hear me or there's any other technical issues, just let me know in the chat. I'm Sean Slade. I'm head of BTS Spark, which is an educational leadership development organization. We're actually global, although I sort of oversee North America, so a small little spot across the US and Canada. And for those who may find my voice a little bit familiar, I used to be in charge of directing the whole child work and mission at ASCD down here in the Washington, DC area for just over a decade. And great to see the work that our affiliates are doing, keeping the whole child focus going. One little thing is I am recording this as well, so I'm more than happy for Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, ASCD to share this as they need to as well. Please feel free to introduce yourself into the chat box, and you all know how to use Zoom, so you can actually use the slideshow, the cursor to move things back and forth and make either my screen or the PowerPoint screens larger or smaller as you wish. If you do have questions, put them in the chat box and we'll definitely try and answer them either during or at the end. And just to let you know, I'll also be staying on a little bit longer afterwards in case anybody has any direct questions. All right, today, here's what we're talking about. New leadership. And it's not just new leadership in terms of if you are a new leader or an emerging leader. It's also new leadership in terms of the type of leadership that's needed nowadays, the purpose of this leadership. We are in new times. So whether you are new to leadership or whether you are an experienced leader, what we're talking about here is what leadership styles, mindsets, skills are needed to be an effective, efficient leader today. So we'll be talking about that. We're also talking about mindsets, and it should become apparent during the conversation about why we focus on mindsets, but mindsets are really key to what we do at BTS Spark. Here's a little example. I remember chatting with one of Arnie Duncan's team a couple of years ago when I was at ASCD, and he said, maybe a little bit glibly, he said, if you could change one thing about education in the US, what would it be? And so I thought for a little bit and I said, well, it's cliched, but if you could change the mindset of every educator that they're teaching children and not teaching content, that mindset change alone would have profound ramifications across every school. You wouldn't need to necessarily, you could, but you wouldn't need to necessarily then tell them what behaviors and actions to do. That change of mindset would change behavior. And then speaking of actions, we're going to introduce you to, very briefly, a couple of actions that you can do or you can trial in your setting as well. So hopefully we're going to give you a bit of the why. We're going to explain what we do and then show you also what you can do or how you can do it. All right. So let's go, moving on. I want you to spend a minute and just reflect. And I'm sure you've done this many times. I'm sure you've done it probably constantly every week over the last couple of years. But the truth is that education has changed, schools have changed, the sector has changed. It's definitely different than what it was in 2019. But it's also probably different than what it was last year and the year before and in the middle of the pandemic. Education, how you process it, how it functions, what its purpose is, has really changed a lot. And there's been all this talk about getting back to normal, when, as we've all read and seen, getting back to normal, or the way it was, didn't work for the majority, a lot of students previously. And to be honest, it will probably work for even fewer in the present. Society's changed, things have changed. So I'm not a big fan of getting back to normal. I am a big fan of looking at what worked both previously, before the pandemic, but also some of those things that came out of the pandemic, and not just the actions, some of those reflections. One thing that's definitely changed is leadership, the how and the why of effective leadership. Now, I mentioned a little bit before that, I worked with ASCD at the central office, talking about whole child. And this is a quote that comes from the Learning Compact Renewed, which was a publication that we put out right before the pandemic. Even though it is 2020, the majority of the writing was before COVID-19. And what was really apparent and really true during the pandemic is that we are in a different world. We are in a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, where we're going to have to make more changes, more decisions on our own. The age of maybe the 5-year plan and not tinkering with it is probably gone. Good to have a 5-year goal, but maybe that plan needs to adjust. In some respects, having a 1-year plan probably needs to be adjustable and nimble. We need new mindsets, new knowledge and skills to thrive in this interconnected world and this interconnected society. The idea of doing things the way we did them is really a bit of navel gazing. We also found, we did a study back in 2020. This was actually the first year of the pandemic. And we did a study at BTS and BTS Spark to look at what were the mindsets and skills of leaders who actually thrived in that first year. Because there were some schools that, if they were more focused on, or had been more focused on, teacher agency, empowerment, student agency, collaboration, creativity, shared leadership, those schools actually tended to do pretty well. What we found in this study, and I'm happy to share it as well, is that the leaders who showed some vulnerability, who displayed their human side, who said, "I don't know," as opposed to "follow me, this is the answer, this is the way," those ones that were more unsure and were comfortable enough in their own shoes in discussing or raising their uncertainty, they're the ones that did well and did better. Not to blame the leaders who actually led like the captain of the ship or the captain of the team and said, "This is what we're doing, follow me," not blaming them, because that's been effective for a number of years. But it wasn't as effective when we're thrown into this realm of uncertainty. You can click onto the link or even just Google this. This was the article we put out in, I believe it was EdSurge, myself and Alyssa Gallagher, another ASCD author. And it was really focusing on those that showed their human side of leadership flourished. And that human side is really what we focus on at BTS Spark. So I want you to take a minute and I want you to think over the last couple of years and consider what actions you've witnessed, and maybe it's ones that you have done, or maybe it's ones that your team has done, or somebody in your school community. I want you to think about what actions have made you proud, because there have been so many. If there was a sector that was able and ready to turn on a dime and make changes and adjust what they're doing to make sure the students and the staff were safe, connected to Wi-Fi, well-fed, transportation continued, and learning, continued, it was education. We're able to make those changes quickly, and we really did show that over the last couple of years. Then what I want you to do is I want you to, after you've thought of that action, think about what mindset sat behind that action. What mindset really allowed that to happen? Because you've got to have a mindset of positivity. You've got to have a mindset of, we can do this, for many of these things to happen. And we're going to put our faith into the technological gods here for a minute, and we'll give it a go. I must admit that Mentimeter does not always work for me. Maybe it's me. Maybe it is personal. I don't know. But I'd like you, if you can get on to Mentimeter by going to menti.com and entering that code 98559766. Type in what mindset really made that action possible. And we'll give it a minute or two to see if the tech gods will be with us. And if not, I do have a backup slide as well. So regardless, we'll be able to discuss this. One reason why I do like Poll Everywhere, which I must admit seemed to work a little bit better for me, or Mentimeter, is that you're able to get not just the voice and the opinion of one person, you're able to get the voice and opinion of multiple people. And then you're able to have a look and see, all right, what responses is the group thinking? So it's not just necessarily the person that's confident enough to speak up in a session or a presentation. It's not just the person that has the loudest voice. You start to get responses from everybody. I used to do this as well with the whole child work, and what was amazing and what I really loved about it was if you were giving a keynote to several hundred people in New York, you could get their responses and then show them the same question that was asked previously in Kansas or California or overseas. And typically those responses were pretty much identical, as long as the question being asked was similar. So yeah, efficiency, perseverance, humility, creativity, collective efficacy, vulnerability, self-efficacy, empathy, growth mindset. When you think about those mindsets and those skills, they're typically also not the ones that you would have had experience in being trained in. They're mindsets that we assume that people develop as they go up through their career, as they move from the classroom to administration to the district office. We assume that people are gaining these skills around empathy and vulnerability and openness and imagination. we assume that they're just by osmosis or by the experience of being human or being a leader, they're gaining these skills. But all of us can probably think of half a dozen people who we've worked with, and they may have been great leaders in certain respects, but perhaps not great leaders when it came to these attributes. The human side of leadership, failing forward, risk takers, integrity, imagination. Remember these, and we might pop back to them a little bit later as well and see if we've had any more added in there. Have a look at those. This was the last time that we did it. And this was at a US Department of Education presentation. I think it was, just a couple of months ago. Collaboration, creativity, innovation, resilience, growth, determination, future promise. What else do we have there? Resilience, vision, excellence. We can do hard things. The power of yes, hope, determination, shared vision. If you don't have these mindsets, if you don't believe that collaboration is beneficial, if you don't believe that we can do it, if you don't believe in innovation or compassion or perseverance, if you don't believe that showing some vulnerability and asking questions will get better responses, then you're not going to go down the path of asking people. More often than not, these were the mindsets that people who succeeded in that first year had. And it wasn't only asking questions of other people in your school. It was, and I must admit, this is a bit of heresy in education, it was asking questions of people outside the sector, in your community, getting different ideas. Because we all have blinkers on and we all think our situation is unique. But in a way, even these little slides are showing, you know what I believe is very similar to what you believe, and what you believe is the same as what other educators believe. We have a lot more similarity in what we understand is needed and what we understand is needed to be successful. As I mentioned before, mindsets sit really at the heart of what we do. We believe that the mindset is needed in order to effectively change the behavior, have impact, and improve results, whatever those results might be, or that impact is intended to be. And too often what we end up doing around leadership development and generally around professional development is we focus on the action, the behavior. We start with that behavior. We try and change that behavior. We say, here are some tools, here are some things to try. And then we're hoping that that will become sustainable. And we're hoping that will cause some impact. But what typically happens, and it's not to say that's wrong, but what we're saying is it's an abbreviated version. It's too short. What we want to do is we want to change that mindset first. Have you look at things in a different way, understand things in a different way, and then we're going to show you some skills and some tools that are going to support that new mindset. What we found in our coaching and our leadership is that by doing this, you're more likely to get long-term sustainable change. So you're not just changing those short-term actions, you're actually changing the fundamental, going back to Simon Sinek, why, to start with. These are the mindsets that we focus on. And where these came from was we looked back at all the coaching we'd done over about a 5-year period. I think it was about 140,000 hours of coaching. And everything that we did, and this was both with corporate clients and nonprofit and education clients, they fell into these 4 buckets of relate, of be, of think, and inspire. The relate is how you relate to others, react and interact, collaborate, discuss, include. The be is your self-efficacy. All right, your self-awareness, your self-understanding. The think is thinking of things alternatively. And then the inspire speaks for itself. It's that North Star and shared purpose. And then what we found was that when we went down a level, it fell into these hexagons or mindsets, as we call them. And what I like about these is there is similarity between these and those mindsets we talked about previously. And those mindsets that we found that were successful in that first year of the pandemic. We don't focus on pedagogy. We don't focus on instructional leadership and walkthroughs and budgeting. Those things are needed, but that's not where our focus is. We focus on transformational leadership, or the human side of leadership. Those skills that, we assume that people get, and very often they don't get as they mature. Speaking of 2020, when people were really at the start of the pandemic and we didn't know how long it would last and what the ramifications would be, these were typically the mindsets that we coached the most. Now, you may have thought that things like leading in uncertainty would have been the ones, but it was really those mindsets that required an immediate change and an immediate action. So engaging others, listening, respect, stretching others, but also self-resilience and self-confidence. What's interesting is, and this matches our research as well, is that the majority of the coaching for leaders falls into that relate bucket, because we're trying to change our school community. We're trying to grow it. We're trying to build that team, empower that group. But what we also find is that in order to do that, we actually need to focus also on ourselves as leaders, because we play a key role. When we did the same thing in 2020, we looked back and it was similar. The majority are falling into that blue, into that orange, but you're starting to see a bit more of a smattering around thinking, decision-making, envisioning, shared purpose. You're also starting to see more coaching going on about longer-term planning, as I interpret this. So now looking at leaning into conflict and empowering others, but still really focused around engaging others and also confidence. So what we do at BTS Spark is we really try and unlock each leader's innate potential. Because when you're in this role, you've already proven that you have the vision or you have the desire. You probably have the right mindsets and maybe they haven't been tapped. We focus it via one-to-one coaching or small group coaching, and we base it around those mindsets. Similar for those who are very familiar with the whole child tenets and indicators, it's a similar way of looking at it. Those 4 domains and those mindsets, similar in a way to the 5 tenets and each one having 10 indicators. But we are the not-for-profit practice of BTS, whereas BTS is working with the Googles and the Coca-Colas and the Chevrons of this world in making sure that their leaders are becoming more human and effective. We do the same practice, but modified and adjusted to education in order to make a greater social impact. And everything we do is run at not-for-profit prices to increase accessibility. Yeah, when we believe one of the major reasons is that everybody should have access to a coach, not just those who are working for a Fortune 500 company. We also believe, and we've seen this play out via the pandemic, that the old style of leadership is not effective nowadays. This human or transformational side, it's what's key. And what's also nice is that even though we're running things at not-for-profit prices, we're using the same IP, same platform, same professional coaches that BTS uses. All right. We also look at things in terms of different roles or different themes. So we've done coaching around well-being and burnout and leading in change or leading in uncertainty, developing emerging leaders, assistant principals. But if we were looking at new leadership in new times, we'd probably be looking at upskilling the leaders around those skills that leaders need if they were new to a role, but we're also talking about leading change or leading in uncertainty. So what we're talking about today, and we'll dive into a little bit deeper, is how do you start to lead change in these changing times? How do you start to be an effective leader in these new times? So if I was going to plan this out in terms of our mindsets, and we typically would look at 2 or 3 or 4 mindsets per a journey, we'd probably be looking at the mindsets of respect, because we're trying to build that team, but also stretch others and also engage others. But similar to what I was mentioning before, we're also going to need to have a look at ourselves as leaders, because I'm not a fan of the economic principle of trickle-down economics. I don't believe that really works, but I do believe in trickle-down culture, especially in the school systems. Whereas the culture of your school, the processes, the climate is influenced strongly by that leader. If you start talking about well-being and mental health, it comes across with credibility because you are the leader. If the mental health expert or the health expert says the same thing, people will say automatically, that's where you come from. Of course, you're going to talk about that. What you talk about as the education leader has relevance. So your role, your resilience, your confidence, the way that you interact is going to have influence over that team. As new leaders in new times, we're trying to influence our school. We're trying to influence our staff. We're trying to influence our teams. But we can't do it without changing ourselves, changing maybe how we interact or react or relate. Not putting all the onus on us as leaders, but really having us understand that we have a huge impact on the way our schools run. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into these. And in particular, we're going to look at resilience. I can choose my response. So it's not resilience in terms of I will survive this, I can get through this, hunker down. It's resilience in understanding that you have agency and you have a choice. So it's a slightly varying definition of resilience. And I will say up front, I'm not a professional coach. So I'm going to lead you through quickly some activities that and some mindset shifts that you can start to think about and change. However, I don't have International Coaching Federation accreditation. I don't have 5 years plus of coaching experience. Our coaches do. I oversee, direct BTS Spark, give keynotes, give these webinars, workshops. I don't do the coaching. So I'm giving you a poor man's interpretation of these. And I hope you will forgive me for that. So we're going to be looking at 3 big ideas that we call in and out of the box, what keeps us in the box, and getting out of the box. The in and out of the box really talks about what are those things that get you triggered? What are those things that get you frustrated? What are those things that turn that switch in your mind and, as we call it, put you in that box, get you angered, get you annoyed? And then we're going to talk about what keeps you in that box, because this is also an understanding. And then also briefly, we'll introduce you to something about, or a technique about getting out of that box, because we are more open, more collaborative, more resourceful when we're not in the box, when we're open to ideas. We use the box because I think most people can relate to the metaphor. In the box is when you're feeling negative. I can't. You're tense. You're stressed. You're resenting something. You're annoyed. You've been triggered. And when you're out of the box, you're more likely to see things broader and bigger, be open to ideas, can learn, choose. It was very simple, for example, for a lot of leaders to be in the box during COVID because they were carrying the weight of their school and their community, not only the academics, but also their health and well-being on their shoulders. That's enough to stress anybody and put anybody in the box. But when they were in that box, they're not going to be asking for ideas. They're not going to be open to new suggestions. They're going to be focused on how do we survive this? There's a natural human reaction when things get stressful or when you're under attack. You hunker down. You focus on the one thing. The truth is that when you're triggered, when you're not at your best, when you're hunkering down, there is actually a physiological reaction going on in the brain that's been created for our survival as a species. So you start to interpret things different. You start to understand and resolve and try and respond to things differently. You're triggered. You have certain thoughts. There's a physiological reaction in the amygdala. Your behavior starts to change. And therefore, the impacts and the results have changed. This is not quite the mindset change to behavior, to impacts and results, but it's a very short-term example of it. If your mindset is protection, if your mindset is danger, if your mindset is anger or annoyance, that will impact your behavior. It will impact your decisions and your results. When these reactions happen in your brain's being biologically triggered. It will impact what you're taking in. It will impact how you are reading the room. It will impact how you are hearing things or reading things. Best example is when you get another phone call or another email from somebody, and emails don't have tone or cadence, but we read it in a way that has tone and cadence. And that can then trigger us, and that can then impact us. And then everything else that follows that, we're justifying that understanding. What we want to try and do is understand what the truth is, and then rationalize, manage the emotions. And I don't mean manage in a way of pushing them aside and ignoring them. I mean manage in a way and understanding our emotions. Because how can we be human in our leadership if we're not managing and understanding and utilizing our emotions, but also other people's emotions? This is not a case of keep your personal emotional side separate and your professional side over there. What it is let's understand, combine these sides, but don't be a slave to your emotion. So what keeps us in the box? We've all seen those little cartoons of the good and the bad, the devil and the angel. This is something similar, but there's two sides of our self-talk that keeps us in the box and keeps us perhaps reading that email with a certain tone and inflection and response. There's the pessimist side that imagines the worst, but there's also that judge side that makes judgment either about ourselves, that we're not good enough, or making judgments about others. And what we want to become better at, and this is where the managing of the emotions is we want to get better at understanding what is the truth. And so pushing aside or toning down or understanding better our pessimist side or our judge, and really try and focus on that realist. There are mind traps that we can fall into, and the word mind traps is there deliberately because they trap you in that box. And as we go through these, and I'll show you them in a minute, you'll probably say, yep, to all of these. And we all fall into these at certain times. But there's probably a couple that we fall into more often than not. Or we may fall into them in a certain relationship conversation that's triggering us. And again, it's not to ignore this side of us, but it's to understand this side of us. Now, I'll show you a bigger version of these in a minute, so you can understand what we're talking about. But these are the things that keep us trapped in that box. And if we're trapped in that box, we're affecting how we hear and see things and how we react to things. It's harder for us to show vulnerability and ask others if we feel that we're being judged all the time, or if we believe that we're going to have to do it myself. No one else can do this as a martyr. All right, so here are some of the outlines. And again, I'm glossing over all of these. Your personal coach would go a lot deeper in unpacking what these mean. But the judge is worrying about other people's perceptions, and often results in a form of leadership that avoids conflict, or maybe lacks a backbone, lacks decision-making. My apologies. The pleaser. on the judge side. The critic or the doubt can quickly undermine themselves by being self-critical, doubting things, questioning your own strength and ability. Frustration, anger, helplessness, stress. The prover, as the name suggests, believes they're always having to prove themselves. They're never happy, content with what they just succeeded in. You know, it's pretty hard to be, someone said fail forward earlier. It's pretty hard to fail forward if you always have to prove yourself. Because then when you do fail forward, you've just proven that you can't succeed. On the pessimist side, the victim, the avoider, that'll never work. That's their role. Never really getting around to the thorny issues, anxiety, exasperation. The martyr, you know, we all have this in a certain aspect, and we all probably did this during the pandemic. The only person that can get this done is me. I need to carry the weight on my shoulders. And there's a certain servant leadership aspect to that as well, that you're trying to protect others. But there's also a harmful side of that because you're not involving others in solving it. And what have we seen in the last 12 months? Mental health, yes, of students, but mental health of leaders is going through the roof because they've been carrying the world on their shoulders. And the worrier, worrying about consequences of an action, meaning that you're being a little too cautious, a little bit too conservative. So maybe when you need an extreme effort or a full court press, you're doing something a little bit less and then it doesn't quite work. Now, I'm sure most of you are saying, I can relate to all of these things. But there's probably a couple in there that you really focus on. Or you say, yep, that's me. I tend to do that a lot. When you're in that box, when you're in that mindset, it's going to impact what behaviors you do, and it's going to impact what decisions you can make. You will be less creative, less collaborative. You'll be more conservative, more concerned. So if you really want to solve some of the big thorny issues and do them quickly, you need to bring others around you. If you want to engage your team, you can't just be that martyr that does everything for yourself. You're the only one carrying the weight. Now, we all have emotions. We're not trying to hide the emotions. We're trying to have you understand who you are, what your emotions are, and manage them. Manage them and use them for your benefit. So each of these things, we've proposed these in a sort of a deficit model. All right, these are the negative side of it. But there are positives of all of these as well. Otherwise, we wouldn't do them, because we wouldn't do things that are consistently negative or never have any positive outcomes. So we can also focus on, when we get into the box, some of the positive aspects of these things. The pleaser is showing great empathy and care, is concerned about others. The critic and the doubter can be discerning, good judgment, being honest. The prover is always looking for the next challenge, or that was great, but there's still something else to do. The avoider or the victim is looking at self-preservation, self-care. That's too dangerous. All right, that's not worth the risk. The martyr takes responsibility. We were all martyrs to a certain extent during the pandemic because education leaders are servant leaders. So it was taking responsibility, showing care for our communities. And the warrior, is also showing concern and being conscientious. So think of it as a continuum, and we're trying to get you into the middle, understanding your emotions, your leadership style, and how you can actually be more aware of them. All right. And then just very briefly, well, this all has been very brief, to be honest, getting out of the box. So one, at its most basic, this process is understand what triggers you, what annoys you, what gets you frustrated. When you're frustrated, what are those mind traps that keep you frustrated, keep you from getting out of the box? And sometimes just knowing those two can then allow you to manage and move out of the box, being aware. But there are also things that we can do, going for a walk, getting out in nature. One of the great things about the pandemic was that people understood by practice that getting out into fresh air and changing the environment can actually change your mood. Listening to music. Somebody said in one of the recent sessions, said, when I'm triggered and in the box, I go down to the kindergartners because they will change your mood within 5 minutes. And so who you're interacting with, your environment, the noises that you see, it might just be the ability to empathize and rationalize and reconsider and understand yourself. There's also, though, a tool that we walk you through that we call ETC. And I'll show this very quickly to you. And what it allows you to do is it allows you, let's say you go for a 30-minute walk, and that change of environment will change your understanding, allow you to tone your emotions down, self-reflect, to make a better decision. All right, but that takes half an hour. Using a tool and getting better at using a tool allows you to do it pretty much in real time. And the more you do it, the more it becomes trained, learned behavior. So the E stands for emotion, understanding, being aware of what you're feeling and what your self-talk is, what's keeping you in that box. But then moving, taking a break, pausing, having a discussion with you about what's actually truthful. All right, what's the emotion talking and what's the truth? And what do you know is true? And also, what do you know that's maybe not true? Or it's 50% true, or 70% true. Now, you may not come to an answer, and we're not saying that thinking about what's true and what's not true is going to clarify everything for you. But what it will do, it will allow you to go to the next stage, which is understanding what choices do I have? This mindset is all about self-resilience. It's all about understanding your choices and then what impact that can have on the culture and the climate of your school where you have influence. So what choices do you have? And then which one do you want to make? Your coach will walk you through a lot deeper than what I have done. We actually recently did some internal coaching around this at BTS as well, and it was actually impactful. Having you think and having you go through the ETC even though it is a tool, and a tool is there just to give you a guidance and help, but having that coach actually talk to you, listen, ask certain questions, it does empower your ability to choose. I'm going to wrap it up in a minute. Just a quick summary of who we are at BTS Spark. So as I mentioned, we have about 75 coaches across North America. We focus on educational leadership. Doesn't mean you have to be a superintendent or a principal or an AP. You know, leadership is a theme, a topic, a mindset. So we work with teachers, we work with community members. And as I mentioned, everything is not-for-profit pricing as well. We do have one little offer for anybody that would like to trial it for free. Typically, our programs go for 5 or 6 sessions, or about spanned over 100 days. Because the sessions are held about every 3 weeks. 1 hour if it's one-to-one, hour and a half if it's a small group. But we're happy to give 3 people, an offer where you can get an experience of the coaching with someone better trained than me. So if that's of interest, there is a sign-up sheet. You can either go to btsspark.org/newleadersASCD or just scan that QR code as well. But it gives you a taste and a flavor of the things that we do. I'm going to open it up now to any questions that people might have. So please feel free to put that in the chat box, would be the simplest. And I am also going to be around as well for 5 or 10 minutes after. So if anybody wants to hang around and ask me some questions, you're more than welcome to. Like I said, this is being recorded, so I'm happy for the affiliates to share this with others as well. I'm also happy to share any of the slides. So if anybody wants to get access to any of the slides, I'm happy to share them. Just send me an email and we can do that as well. I'm going to move on to the next slide because it has all of the contact details, and it also has that QR code offer. But if anybody does have a question, more than happy to answer.